Welcome back to Federal Insights, a hybrid cloud approach to managing AI and AI data, sponsored by Thundercat Technology and Dell Technologies here on Federal News Network. My guests today are Nick Perez. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Cloud Practice at Thundercat Technology, and Al Ford is the Artificial Intelligence Alliances Manager at Dell Technologies, and I'm Tom Temin. Let's talk about the idea of data center extraction, because data centers are the bane and the glory of federal agencies. They've been told to get rid of data centers, consolidate data centers, but also modernize data centers. And as we know, data centers play an important role even now in the cloud era. So how does data center extraction play into this whole picture, especially for high-end work like AI and AI training and ML?
Thanks for that question, Tom. We have a number of customers that are in that data set who certainly lessen the footprint of the data center they have, and or ultimately get out of the data center business completely. Ultimately, they'll move a lot of their workloads to the cloud providers. All right. Obviously, we've really done this whole thing about moving email. We've got disaster recovery and backup, and now we've got test and dev, and all those kind of typical, but very much the low-hanging fruit. Now we're getting into really kind of the CI/CD and IT transformation. But there is typically a couple of workloads that you can't remove. There's this physical stack typically. There's a whole bunch of theory about a VM, securing a VM and protecting it. So there's definitely some comfort level of keeping that physical stack. So we have a number of customers where we have helped them place a physical equipment in racks in a colo. So it's still someone else's data center, but it's much, much closer. They can still go visit it and touch it, but it's right next door to those hyperscale cloud providers. And then likewise, there's workloads where they want high performance or for the physical equipment that physically hasn't been on-ramped to the cloud, it hasn't been virtualized, or it has, it's just proprietary, or it needs some technical reason why it needs to stay on premise. We help them with that as well. So we help them with colo providers. Many of them are also FedRAMP. So we have a number of customers that are doing that particular thing today. And or really high speed storage. They need some additional encryption equipment or strategies that they have, or they have some intellectual property themselves around that particular thing. We help them place that in other third-party hosting areas outside, but they're very, very close. I mean, we're talking milliseconds away from the cloud provider.
So Al, that sounds like yet another location. We talked about edge, we talked about the data center, we talked about commercial cloud. Colo, we haven't heard as much about recently in all of the cloud, discussions over the past few years, but sounds like colo is still an active option.
Absolutely. Colo is becoming more of an option. One of the reasons for that is I think there's a high amount of cost associated perhaps with a cloud service provider, because they might charge you as the data is both ingress and egress out of those scenarios. And so some of the strategies we see our government customers looking at today are, how do I bring all my data into one location that's off-prem, right, off their location, keep it at one location, and then perhaps go to different cloud service providers for the compute capabilities that they can access. So we're definitely seeing a little bit more of that to cut back on the costs in these operational models. And so again, where Dell works closely with Thundercat and Nick specifically is really trying to help support and enabling those tiered storage capabilities to help support the various workloads and their specific bespoke needs in those environments. So this again is why we definitely partner with Thundercat so that we can help provide the more specific environment in that scenario.
Yeah, yes, Nick, the whole tiering idea is not just a cost-driven thing to do, but also, I imagine, an efficiency one. Because
absolutely, you keep it nearline. The stuff that's touched, every I'd say in a period of time that's within like 18 months, you want it nearline, very, very close where it's being used. But you want to move those offline, the older stuff, and move it more to cold type technologies, or just either low speed type storage. But it's the storage platform is doing that on your behalf. I mean, that's a key element here. There's no an administrator, there's no person that's figuring that out. That's artificial intelligence that's actually working that particular out and actually moving those particular workloads. But I think, customers are moving workloads to the cloud. Sometimes they thought it was the right idea, they thought it was the right workload, but it turns out that it physically isn't. And cost is ultimately the key way you actually get to see that. But performance as well. We do see a number of customers have some really, not the right profile, chatty type applications, applications that are constantly, talking and actually consuming cost, and they want to move that back, but they physically, they don't want to put the investment in place to actually put that on refreshed hardware, or they've reallocated the hardware that it was previously on. And so Thundercat helps. That's we're extremely flexible on helping our customers. We got a couple use cases where we've actually had Thundercat owned government operated equipment where we rent it back. So the customer gets that subscription, they get that consumption, operational expense experience, but without the initial investment. And Thundercat's doing that on behalf, and we're letting them rent it back for 2 to 3 years. And we're doing that with Dell in very, very creative ways. We can actually help them do that. And we're supplementing the equipment. So we not only are like that tiering, it is telling us and alerting Thundercat that, hey, the customer is actually consuming a little more storage. You need to apply and implement some stuff and provision it inside that particular rack or that equipment before the customers can consume it. And that's AI and ML that's helping us figure that stuff out.
Yeah, so in other words, you almost get the scalability that is purported to be the cloud virtue, yet not in the classical cloud.
Absolutely. And we would say we're bringing those cloud-like technologies, we're bringing that to the customer, in the colo or in on-premise, right as close to them within their security perimeter. Absolutely.
Right. And additionally, by removing that technical debt, they're saving on their overall service and support costs as well. So just another huge benefit to everything Nick just shared.
Mostly predictable costs. That's what the customer's after. Yep. I'm saying predicting monthly costs, and then they can focus their big budget, big ticket items, and do the real capacity planning and the real architecture on the stuff that's real key to their mission and or their business.
Well, yes, because you do hear agencies constantly talking about the need, and this has been not just agencies, but OMB policy now for several administrations to try to get past the capex model for IT spending and more to the OPEX. So this moves what would have been the piece that's still capex, your data center, into the OPEX model, correct?
Absolutely, and that's the VAR. We're putting the value right back into helping the customer figure that out, whether it be by consumption by the user, by the gigabyte, or by the hour. However, can we help the customer consume that particular workload without that capex expense right up front?
And this must be particularly relevant. You mentioned chatty applications to try to have on your own premise, but not maybe in your own data center, because so many of the pandemic related programs that the federal government has created, which also operates not only between citizens and directly to the federal government, but talk about chatty, the state governments are also in between this whole structure. And it would seem like that's particularly a smart thing to do now because of all of these applications and business loans and payments to individuals. And it looks like that's going to continue for a while. So we might see this kind of chatty stuff.
Yeah, we see, just not chatty, the transaction workloads have absolutely dramatically gone up, right? And so people are not coming in the office, they're not coming into the branches, they're not coming into where it was a slower transaction. It's now much more online, much more high speed, and the sheer volume of what's happening. We saw that with, I think, when you look at the unemployment, people were trying to get paid their unemployment, and it was just overwhelming. They were crushing the systems that were out there, and they were just obviously architected on premise. And that's where you see the cloud gives you that burst capability where the demand is high, and ultimately my costs are directly in line with that particular type of consumption. But it's helping the citizens at the time they need. You got to make very, very, I'd say not drastic, but very kind of bold moves at the early stages of that to get ahead of it.
Yeah. All right, Al, we've got about a minute left, so I'm going to throw the last word to you. And it sounds like artificial intelligence is helping people manage artificial intelligence.
That's correct. The AI is supporting the AI. And actually, to touch on your example there at the state level, we're seeing states having data strategies that incorporate sharing certain sets of that data with commercial companies that are supporting their missions inside the state level. So effectively, as you're talking about being able to burst applications and workloads from location to location and also sharing that data, you're then able to do further analytics across all those data sets together. So it starts at the federal level, moves down to the state level, and then it touches all the smaller businesses and commercial businesses that the governments interact with on a daily basis.
All right. Well, you've given us a lot to think about and some new paradigms maybe for computing in the post-pandemic age. I want to thank today's guests. Al Ford is the Artificial Intelligence Alliances Manager at Dell Technologies. Nick Perez is the Chief Technology Officer for Cloud Practice at Thundercat Technology. I'm Tom Temin. You've been listening to Federal News Network. For more on this discussion, please visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Thundercat.